pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome to the regular school committee meeting of Monday, October 5th, 2020. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. I'm going to start tonight with an executive session. The Attleboro School Committee will convene an executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Sections 21A, 2, and 3, to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations with union personnel and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. The school committee will reconvene in open session following the executive session. We have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, so we will convene an executive session and then reconvene here. Mr. Hill, this pertains entirely to the IEA. So we'll just let you know when we're done. And for the rest of you, we will, someone will be calling you momentarily into the executive session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve. Hey, I'm right here.
They're back on. Can you tell if the other members are back on Zoom?
I'm here. This is Shannon. I'm here.
God is here.
Bob is here.
Diane's here.
All right, welcome back to the Attleboro School Committee meeting. At this time, before we get to open forum, following up on our executive session, we have a proposed memorandum of agreement with the Attleboro, the AEA, and the Paraprofessionals Association regarding the reopening of schools. The agreement has been discussed amongst members. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there any discussion regarding the proposed agreement? All right, seeing none, I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Abstain.
Thank you. And thank you to the administration for working that out. Next, the agenda tonight, we have open forum. Is there anyone in the community that would like to address the committee at open forum tonight?
There are a lot of people, but none of them are expressed interest.
Thank you. Being no one who's expressed interest in speaking at open forum, I will go ahead and close open forum. Start with our business agenda tonight and turn it over to the superintendent for his report. Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. I have for you this evening a PowerPoint presentation to review the data that I think we need to examine to discuss how we should proceed as a district under COVID. So I'll begin with a brief overview of the big picture here. So this is the weekly COVID report that we discussed at our last meeting, I believe. We published a new one today. We will do this weekly on Monday. It runs through the Friday of each week. So today's report is accurate up through Friday. I would mention that if anyone was paying particularly close attention, some of the numbers in past weeks actually changed this week. Our knowledge of what has happened and what's true does adjust a little bit over time. I have more sympathy now for why the state's data sometimes changes. It's a fluid situation, and I made the decision that it was better to go back and alter the data to reflect what we now know is true rather than to continue to report something that we no longer believe to be the case. Small minor adjustments, a case here, a case there, but ultimately the numbers are pretty much the same. You will see that there is a pretty significant uptick in confirmed close contacts this week, but you'll also notice that the total number of positive cases in that week is actually one less than the week before. So the disparity between those two numbers is something that I'd like to talk about as we get further into detail. But so this is the big picture, and I hope to get into the details to help make better sense of what this chart is telling us about our district. Next slide. So bottom line here is that there are 209 members of our community who have either been isolated. Now, when you test positive, you isolate, and if you're a close contact, or if you travel to a state that is in the red for the travel restrictions, in either of those cases you are quarantined. So between the people who have been quarantined and the people who have been isolated, we have 209 people, and that is since we started keeping data, which was that first week, which ended with September 11th. So that actually reflects just prior to school even starting. Because people who tested that positive or were put into quarantine that week before school started began the school year in those conditions, and which is why we started tracking them. Of those 209 people, 19 of them are staff members and 190 of them are students. And of those 209, 71 of them have returned. Their period of isolation or quarantine has ended and they have returned. Of this list, 121 of them were exposed as a result of being in school. So that's a troubling number that we have certainly had quite a bit of exposure to. And then, but the next one I think is the much more important one, which is that as of today, it is still true that 0 members of our community have tested positive as a result of coming to school. So, being asked to quarantine as a result of exposure, being a close contact, is a precaution we take to help prevent an outbreak. And so a significant number of people have been asked to quarantine based on the state's guidelines. None of those people have yet to test positive. Now, there are still quite a few who are still out, and we'll get into that in detail. But as of now, no one has tested positive as a result of being in school. So what does this all mean? Well, first let's zoom out and talk a little bit about the community context. So one, looking at the state level data, you'll see that I didn't go back and check this perception, but perhaps I should have before I started talking about it on live TV, but it seems to me that the state's situation has grown a little bit more dicey over the last couple of weeks as well. We are in the red, but when you look around us, Bristol County is not faring quite as badly as some other counties. Bristol County as a whole has an average daily cases of 7.4, which we are above. But in terms of our region, we're not lagging, we're actually ahead. When you compare that to our neighbor, Rhode Island's average daily cases is 12. So that is a significant neighbor and a factor in terms of our local context. So we have some communities around us that have had some higher numbers, but we are the highest on this side of the line, but Rhode Island remains significantly higher on the other side of the line. If you also look in other parts of Boston, other parts of Massachusetts, Middlesex County has a rate of 8, Essex County has a rate of 13, and Suffolk County, which includes Boston, has a rate of 13. So it does seem to be an increase of the spread of the virus in the Commonwealth, both locally and across the country. This is the graph of how the picture has looked since the beginning. And what I would point out here is not only have we crossed that red line, which is what has certainly gotten a lot of attention in the community since Wednesday, but the point I would make here is that after a long stretch in which we enjoyed being at a very, very low level, we started to see an increase in that number as early as late July. And you'll notice that it slowly crept up and it has been since then sort of accelerating in its rise to finally cross that line. When we get a little bit greater detail over the last 6 weeks, you'll see that we finally crossed that threshold line for 8 to consider going to remote. This Wednesday, we went up to 9.3. If you look at the line and take a look at its general slope, you'll notice that 9.3 is pretty much in keeping with the overall trend over the 6-week period. In fact, last week's data of 7.6 probably a little bit below trend, but on the whole, that number fits a pattern that we've been experiencing over 6 weeks. Now, I should mention that on the threshold of 8, the state released the threshold of 8 in August, and just said that that was the consideration. And they wanted communities in the red at that time to consider remote, and the communities not in red to not consider remote. I think it's pretty fair to say that they were trying to combat how many communities at that time were openly talking about going full remote, and they were trying to make the case that most communities should not start in full remote. So that was the context in which they released that guidance. As soon as we started to shift towards starting school, the state realized that it had a bit of a problem in that communities were, who had been green or yellow, were now becoming red. And what they made very clear as they changed the guidance, or added to that guidance, I should say, I guess more accurately, is that they did not want communities to switch modes until they had 3 weeks of data. And the point that they were making was twofold. One, that because of the nature of how that number is calculated, you can have a spike that's related to one incident and doesn't really capture their overall picture. So we have neighbors to our north, right, that had, they went to red 1 week, they were red for 2 weeks. And when you look at it, their health department said that that was attributable to an outbreak at a nursing home. And that if you took out the nursing home outbreak, which obviously didn't pose much of a threat to their schools, that they really, they really weren't facing a problem. And they decided not to make any changes. And then the number swiftly went back down below red. So those are the kinds of circumstances I believe the state was attempting to anticipate and saying it's not good for students or families or staff for that matter to be ping-ponging back and forth between remote and hybrid every time a number changes or you have an isolated outbreak. So part of it is just what the data really means, and then part of it was this idea that you needed to use more data and more time to get a real sense of what the bigger picture was. So in September, they changed the guidance to say, wait 3 weeks. So we are over 9 now, but in terms of the guidance, that does not require immediate action. And then the last piece of data that we've been looking at all along here is the positivity rate. And that did go over 3 for the first time. And that number doesn't have any significance in Massachusetts in and of itself, but again, I've put the 2 lines in to represent the WHO threshold and the New York threshold, just to give you a sense that we are in a zone where schools would consider that as a number of interest, and one that should be considered as part of the overall picture. So as long as that number continues to climb, that's a sign that we have something going on locally that needs to be considered. So that's the broader context that we're operating in terms of how the city and the state itself are doing in terms of data. So now that we're in school, in many ways, the much more important data is what's happening in our schools. Right. So what's happening outside of the school certainly affects what happens inside the schools, which is why those numbers are also important. But in terms of really assessing the safety of the school system, we should look at what we're seeing in terms of positive cases. So we've been doing this. We've been in school for 3 weeks. This is 4 weeks of data because again, that first week of data represents cases that affected that first week. So we started off with 4 cases on the first day. The next week was an improvement. We only had 2 cases. Then the next week shot up to 7. And then last week we had 6 cases. So 6 and 7 is sort of the recent trend, and signifies that we are contributing to the overall numbers in Attleboro. How did we get up in the red? There are some different contributors, but these cases are certainly part of that story. So where are our students getting COVID? When you test positive, there's pretty extensive contact tracing that occurs to try to determine where the exposure came from and also who else has been exposed as a result of that positive case. So we've had 19 positive cases, as I've said, and 15 of them we know came from contact with a family member who had a positive case as well. So, a significant majority of our students who have tested positive because of exposure at home. We have 3, which I lumped together as other. I don't want to get into the specifics of that, but let's just say that it involved contact with a known person outside of school. And then the last one, there was one unknown case where there is no known contact with a positive. And so it is likely from asymptomatic exposure. Could have happened anywhere. That includes the schools. I have to admit that because we don't know, we can't say definitively that this student didn't get it from an asymptomatic student at school, but we do know that they didn't get it from contact with any of our positive cases. And so where they got it is unknown. And from the state perspective, and we called and talked to I didn't talk to the epidemiologist, but the health department did. And they made it very clear that they do not consider that case a school case. They signify it as unknown because it could be anywhere. So that's where you're getting it. And again, just to reiterate, none of those sources include the schools. So that has yet to happen.
Mr. Gates, you have a quick question?
2 quick questions. One, the 19 cases, those are new cases, not current, not currently ill students.
Well, some of them are in their isolation period.
Right. No, I'm saying so last week we had 6.
Those were
new
6
cases.
new that week.
Okay. And my second question, I'm trying to remember, I know we've talked about this before. Do these numbers include students that are ABA?
Yes.
Okay, so not all 19 of these students were actually in the buildings.
Most of them are not.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We'll get into that level of detail. The next thing I want to point out is the age of these students. Again, to try not to reveal too much about their personal information. I just went by level here. But there's a perception that all these cases are just at the high school, because certainly the high school cases have gotten the most attention by far. But in fact, these 19 cases are pretty evenly distributed through the district, right? We had 5 elementary cases, 6 at the middle school, and 7 at the high school, and there's been 1 staff member who's tested positive. So that's a distribution of those 19 cases. So why does it feel like the high school's been the source of so much attention? Well, if we get into it, of those 19 cases, 6 cases included in-school exposure, while 13 did not. So in 13 cases, the student tested positive, and based on the timing of how things worked out with, perhaps they were a close contact of a family member. So here's an example of how that happens. How do you get a positive that doesn't make their way into school? My dad catches the virus. He tests positive. I'm a close contact because I live at home. I'm quarantined. During my quarantine period, 5 or 6 days into that, I test positive, right? Because I've been quarantined for that time, when I test positive, because you do the contact tracing, you go back 2 days, everything that's happened within 2 days from the positive test. So actually 2 days from the exposure. So in that case, that student tests positive, but there's no close contacts because the student wasn't in school as a result of being quarantined in the first place. So the 13 that did not have in-school exposure were in situations similar to that. In the case of people who are in the schools, what happens is that you go to school, you're feeling fine, you go home, you suddenly don't feel so fine, you call the doctor gets you tested, and then 2 days later, you test positive. Well, when you go back and say, okay, well, when did your symptoms start? They started, Tuesday. Okay, you didn't go to school on Tuesday because you felt symptoms. We tested you Tuesday afternoon. Your test results come in on, say, Thursday morning. We now realize that you were symptomatic on Tuesday, so we go back 2 days, and you were at school on Monday. So now there was exposure in school on Monday because you were within 2 days of your symptoms and at school. That's That's how those 6 in-school cases happen. And, you know, the state's guidelines, you know, clearly anticipate that that's going to be a reality, right? Many times people don't know they have it, and that's how it spreads.
Are those 6 all at the high school?
So, no, 5 are at the high school.
5 are.
1 at the ESC. So, those 6 cases of in-school exposure have resulted in 121 close contacts, 16 staff members, and 105 students. Right, so in those cases, those students were in school, and we have to identify who were close contacts. So close contacts is defined by the guidance. It's anyone who is within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, regardless of whether you're wearing a mask or not. So if you're around someone who wasn't masked, you know, certainly that counts as well. But people who are wearing a mask, if you're within that 6 feet boundary, and you're there for more than 15 minutes, and that's 15 minutes cumulative through the day. So, you know, it's if you are say with them on the bus and eat with them at lunch and then go home with them on the bus, you know, that all can add up to, well, the bus ride itself is probably more than 15 minutes, but it's cumulative throughout the day. So when that happens, the nurses have to go through and look at all the schedules related to that student, look where the student's been, whether they take the bus or not, whether or not they're on a sports team, whether or not, you know, they have to get the seating charts from the lunchroom, from the classroom, and they go through, and basically anyone who was sitting next to that student, even at 6 feet, is considered a close contact. So you would have to be sitting farther than 6 feet to not be a close contact. All those students are then identified, and the family, we call home and identify them. Now, some people end up being close contacts through the state's contact tracing. So the school only has the ability to do the contact tracing of the student's time in school. So we do that piece of it. And then the state, their contact tracing collaborative, CTC, right? The health department calls them, and then they do the contact tracing for the time outside of school. So sometimes we have students who are close contacts because they were sitting next to the student or were on the bus with them or ate lunch next to them. But other times they did sports together after school. And so then we find out about that from the state, sometimes a day or two later. These are all very labor intensive processes. And in both the case of the city and the school system, this is being done by people who have full-time jobs doing other work, and they're doing this on top of that. I have to say that our nurses are putting in a lot of extra time to try to do this as expediently as possible. But you know, it's a very labor-intensive process. It takes time, and sometimes it's a process that, you know, you think you have everybody, and then a day or two later, something occurs that makes you realize that, you know, someone was missed. And so we're vigilant. We're trying to get it right. We're trying to get everybody. And so sometimes people are contacted after that initial day because people realize that someone was missed or that something was misinterpreted. One of the things that we've realized through this whole process is that asking teachers to do seating charts on their own is problematic because different people do it differently. So what your chart looks like and what someone else's chart looks like, you know, the nurses have to figure out how to interpret those things. And so rather than spend a lot of time trying to chase down teachers who are only available during certain times through the day because they're teaching and try to figure all these things out, we need to come up with a system of seating charts so that the nurses know how to read them no matter who's writing them. That's a recent development that we're going to be working on as a result of a lesson learned. So as a result of those close contacts, we have students who are quarantined. So We have 174 students who have been quarantined. 105 of those are due to in-school exposure. 34 of those are due to recreational sports. And I say recreational sports because we have not had close contacts on any of our athletic teams at the high school. This is all through recreational sports in the community. 30 quarantines are due to family exposure. And then we had 5 students who were quarantined because of travel restrictions. So the cases in school. Here is a little chart with some basic information. We've had 6 of them. So of those 19 students, only 6 had been in the building. Those are the dates and the schools, and you'll see that 5 of them are at the high school, 1 is at the ELC, and then how many students for each case and how many staff members were identified as close contacts. And what you'll see is that in some cases you have large numbers of students as close contacts with no staff members. In other cases you have lower numbers of students. In some places you have a mix of staff and students. It just really reflects that the realities and the experiences are varied, and it has a real impact on exactly how many people are affected each time. It's not, a clear cut, well, if it's one person, this is what it looks like, is how many people get affected. It can really, really vary widely. So as we think about what to do about our situation, there are a couple other considerations which I think we should talk about. The mayor was nice enough to include the school department on the call with the Massachusetts COVID enforcement and intervention team that reached out to the city as a result of us going red, as they like to say. That meeting was mostly targeted for municipal concerns, but they were asked about whether or not, as a result of being red, we should close the schools. And I thought it was pretty pointed that the response was that a strong urging to wait the 3 weeks, like the guidance says. That was a very, very clear message from the state that to treat the week's data as a reason to switch immediately to remote was not what they thought was prudent. I had another meeting with Sturdy today. They had widened that conversation and now includes representatives from both from North Attleboro, Mansfield, Norton. So that was a pretty rich discussion. It's always good to be able to participate in this dialogue because different institutions certainly have a different lens on this issue, and there isn't any normal forums to have such discussions, and our differing contexts reveals some interesting differences in how we think about these things. But my one takeaway from that conversation that I would relate to the committee today is that the outbreak on award at Sturdy recently has really, really put stresses on their testing capacity, and they seem to be very, very concerned about their ability to keep up with testing if cases in the area continue to rise. That was a pretty significant message. The other thing that I would mention is that we did confirm that to get assistance from the state on testing, so testing is a big concern for them, and there is the rapid response team that the state's put together to help communities with testing. So the question has been, why do we not qualify for that? Because we've been told that we don't. And I did get confirmed that eligibility for the response team is completely based on in-school transmission. So as much as our numbers put us in the red and are a point of concern, it's something that the state is closely watching and providing some forms of support to the city on. From their perspective, the fact that there have been no transmissions within the schools. And again, I want to reiterate that they're not just taking our word for it, that that's the case. I'm telling you that there have been no in-school transmissions because that's what they say about it, right? The state epidemiologists are the ones who are making those decisions and looking at our data and deciding for us whether a case is in school or not. I'm not a doctor. I'm not qualified to make that decision. I'm purely reporting what their decision is. Obviously, I don't want anyone to catch COVID as a result of coming to school. So as far as that continues to be true, I'm going to continue to mention that because I think it's really important, because I think a lot of people are working very hard to make that a reality. But as self-interested as I am to have that be true, it's important that we're telling the truth and being accurate. And that's based on what the state's assessment is, not mine. Another thing that I would mention in terms of athletics, I did confirm what my perception was, that if we as a district were to entertain a move to remote, that would effectively end this athletic season for our athletes. I believe that that was the case under the guidance, and I did speak with the state today. And they confirmed that that is the guidance from the state.
Is it as a district or just the high school?
Well, the district is
Well,
I mean, the high school is the only school in the district that has.
Right. So
MIA
if we were to consider the schools differently like we did in August, and the high school was remote, but the others were not, that would end the athletic season for the fall.
So if we went as a district, correct, but not necessarily one school.
But if the one school with the high school,
That's what I'm saying. It's the move as a district that does that. I think the bigger issue here that perhaps I should mention is that, as you may have heard, we had our matches this week canceled, and we've been receiving a lot of calls. It might be a moot point as to whether or not the guidance calls for it to be canceled or not, because other communities, quite frankly, are very concerned about playing Attleboro as a result of our status under this. And I spoke to the state about my concerns about how I think that that's an improper use of this data. And they agreed, but they let me know that this is happening across the Commonwealth. This is not particular to Attleboro, that across the Commonwealth, they're hearing that when communities turn red, their neighbors are shunning them. So we're experiencing that a bit as well. But yes, a move as a district definitely does. I will have to seek further clarification about whether or not a particular school does or doesn't. I don't think it does, but I will ask that follow-up question. The last thing to consider in all of this is the AVA. Just briefly, I need to inform the committee that we have limited capacity in the AVA. I know that it's virtual, but it is a school. It has personnel. We staffed it based on the demand as indicated by parents when we asked them in August. And, we have limited budgetary restraints. In fact, without COVID relief funds, we would not be able to maintain what we're doing right now. We have significantly overdrawn on our staff to make this work. And as a result, we only have so many seats because as much as the curriculum and the platform can take more people, it doesn't work without the staff who meet with kids, help kids, and do support them in many, many different ways. And so we are roughly at capacity. We have a waiting list. We have some people who are going to be rejoining the hybrid model, and so that will open up some seats. And there are a couple of grades where we have some seats. So I'm not saying that we're completely maxed out quite yet, but right now the demand for it is in excess of what the seats are. So I just, in thinking this all through, I wanted to notify you all that there will be parents who are unhappy about the fact that we cannot provide them the AVA when they want it. And that's a function of, there literally isn't room for it, and there's no requirement that we provide it. We have to provide, as we talked about the summer, we have to allow people to come back to the hybrid if they want to, right? We can't keep people in the AVA who don't want to be there. But that doesn't go both ways, and we don't have the capacity. So people are going to have to wait that want to be there if there isn't a seat for them. And that's another part of the impact of whatever decision we make about this is pretty significant. And just while we're talking about the ABA, there's a couple things I wanted to say. The first is that I know that the rollout of the ABA has been, not without its issues, and that the platform that we've chosen is not perfect either. There have certainly been some concerns that I've heard raised by various parents. I would say that I think that's all to be expected, considering that as a school, it did not exist in August, and it does now, and we have a significant number of students attending there. To do that all in the amount of time that we had, working off of a platform that nobody knows, was a pretty significant lift, and one that we will continue to work on to get better at throughout the year as best we can. But if people had a perception that that was somehow going to be, a seamless transition to that world, I guess I didn't do a good enough job of making it clear what we were taking on and how difficult that was going to be for all of us. The other thing I would say is that there have been, well, just like they're concerned about the ABA, there are some people who are concerned about what we're experiencing in terms of hybrid instruction. And so as people try to weigh the choices between these things, I just want to make a couple brief comments. The first is that I think part of the perception about what's going on for our hybrid model is that people forget that teacher attention is the most important aspect of our educational environment, right? And it's one of the reasons why we want lower class sizes, right? The smaller the class size, the less that teacher's attention gets divided by more people. And so in a school day, under normal circumstances, if a teacher teaches the old-fashioned way of just standing in front of the room and teaching for the entire period to the entire class, the student is not getting that direct attention. So we improve our results when we find ways to split up the time so that there's some of that, but then there's also time for more focused small group work where there's a lot greater attention for students. But to make that happen, students have quite a bit of independent work that they complete in the classroom. And so in our approach to hybrid, we decided that we did not want to have the students at home be included in the class with the students in school as one big class, because to make that work is to drive the instructional practices of our teachers towards the more old-fashioned, I'm going to lecture to 25 kids because I can't really do much else with them if half of them are here and half of them are someplace else. Instead, what we asked them to do is to think through the things during the day that they're asking students to do independently, move those to the remote day, and do all the work that they do with smaller groups while they have them in place. And so that model, we actually think, makes better use of the time that we have and maximizes the value of in-school instruction. I know that that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, because what people would prefer is that their kids are not getting that attention. But we really believe that by having true attention when they're with us, that will more than compensate for the fact that they're doing that independent work at home. And I understand the frustration of parents who have very clearly said that they don't want to be the teachers of their children. And I, as a parent with kids doing remote instruction, a couple days a week, I understand what they're saying. It can be very, very frustrating. But we do think that and this is, by the way, partly why we didn't go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We went Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, because by spacing these things out, we can help kids from losing momentum, preventing them from losing momentum, so that we can keep kids on track and do the best we can. So, for the people who want to go to ABA, they can't. I mean, the first thing I would say is that the concerns about the ABA that you'll hear from people that are in it, I think, are well-founded. I don't think we can do as good a job with the ABA for all students as we can in the regular school. Now, I think there are some students for whom what we do with the AVA, they're particularly well suited for and can be very, very successful. They exist, and I think it's great. And by the way, no matter what happens, no matter how long it takes for COVID to go away, the AVA is never going away. Its time has come. As a district of this size, we should be providing these opportunities for the various kids that this is the right option for them. And I don't think that number is ever going to go down to zero again. I think we're going to have kids in this kind of environment from here on in. And again, some kids thrive in this, but we're at our best at meeting the needs of our students, and we have a district of over 40% high need students. And so for them, I would say that we can do a better job of educating them in the hybrid model. And so, because we've had 0 cases in the schools, I would argue that our schools are safe, and the best place for our kids is in our schools. And so if you can buy into this very conscious decision we made on how to deliver instruction, I think that things will be better if we can convince more families to return to our schools, because we're not really set up to be successful with as many people in the AVAs that we currently have. I don't know if Ms. Regan, you want to add to any of that?
Sure. Just one other point is with the small group instruction that happens throughout the day, it gives us more of an opportunity to really focus on the skills that need to be delivered for specific students and personalize that learning experience. If we were teaching whole group all day, it just doesn't allow us to be able to do that. And so teaching hybrid in the way that we are affords us that opportunity.
So, because I know that, this is not a reason to or not do anything in particular, but whatever we do does impact the situation in the AVA. All right, so given all this, I have some recommendations. In terms of the big picture, obviously we have to prioritize safety. Safety has to come first. As much as I wish we didn't have to spend as much time during the day dedicated to the protocols that keep our kids and our staff safe. If we can't keep them safe, if we have transmission within the schools, then our ability to do school becomes completely undermined. So, safety has to come first. And I think the best way to be safe is to listen to the experts, adhere to state guidance. In a lot of the communication I've received, whether positive or negative, there's a lot of, and I'll be honest, I do this too in my own thinking, right? A lot of Monday morning quarterbacking of, the rules should be this, the rules should be that. Again, the one I always like to go back to is that I think Massachusetts should be like Vermont, and we should do travel restrictions based on county, not by state, right? Rhode Island's numbers are bad, but that's only because of Providence. If you look at some of the other counties, they're very low, and I should be able to go where those rates are low. So we all engage in our own thoughts about the ways in which the state's rules are arbitrary and not necessarily always the way we think they should. But I would say that the safest thing for us to do is to not think that we know better than the people who are the experts, and to follow what they say. And then I'd like to just expressly say, because a lot of communication I got from parents in the last week or so has been to urge us to keep the schools open. And I just want to explicitly say that, of course, we want to keep the schools open, right? We're a school system. This is what we do. This is our our vocation. This is what we're trained to do. This is what we're experts in. And while these conditions have us strained our ability to do our work and do it well, it is the opinion of the administration that if, to whatever degree we can do school safely, we should, because we think it's what's best for kids. It's what's best for their development. And while this is a difficult situation, to abandon our kids and to take away the in-person experience, which as social animals, I think is very, very important to all of us, I think would be a mistake. But I do, for the people that are hearing that or think that, I plan to keep schools open no matter what, that's with where I started, which is that you have to be able to do it safely. And so, as much as we can keep schools open, we will, but it has to be safe. And so the real question is, are the schools safe or aren't they? And I think what we've discovered firsthand in a very real way is that, the virus is here in Attleboro. It is spreading in Attleboro. It is present. And there's reason to believe that it's increasing. But at this time, and this could, at any moment, this could change. And when it does, the school committee will be the first to know. But as for now, we have not seen spread in the schools. And that's with all of these cases, right? So as long as that continues to be true, it seems like the protocols that the state has called for do, in fact, keep us all safe. And as long as that's the case, anything we decide to do has to be balanced against the fact that as of now, we're not seeing transmission in the schools. And then finally, obviously, whatever we do, we have to make sure that we can take care of kids. So specifically, what would I recommend to you this evening? The first thing is, I keep getting asked, how much transmission in schools is too much, as if there might be like a number, like, the threshold of 8. I'm not aware of any such metric or number that says that some amount of transmission is okay. To me, what I think we have to look at is when there is an in-school transmission, which I hope is never, but if that happens, it's not so much whether it leads to 1 more case or 3 more cases or 5 and like setting up an arbitrary number that's too much. It's really about trying to understand why it happened, right? And to the degree we can say it happened for this reason, which is something that can be addressed or can be understood, then we might be less concerned about that because it's not a sign that it doesn't work. To the degree that there's no ability to determine why the transmission happened, that suggests that perhaps there's a problem. And especially if what the reason for the transmission is that there's a place that isn't following the rules, then that's a deep concern. That's a deep, deep concern. So I'm saying in my first recommendation that if we have reason to believe that the implementation of the guidelines in a school is part of the reason why we have transmission in that school, then I would want to call that an emergency situation and put that school into a remote mode for 2 weeks while we sort that out before we can safely return, before we let that turn into a situation in which it gets out of hand. So no questions about that.
I'm going to wait for questions until the end because we have the people on Zoom who we can't see. So we'll do them all at the end.
So my second recommendation is that, just like the first was about specific schools, if we start to see transmission across the district, and as a result, we start to worry about whether or not the protocols work. So the first one's really about if the protocols work, but we have transmission because people aren't following them, that's a problem related to a specific situation in which we should take action in that school to correct that. If the feeling is that we are following the guidelines and the guidelines aren't working, I think that's a thing where we'd have to consider a district action, and that would be something the school committee should take up, and that's something that I should report to all of you. So treating those a little bit differently is what I'm getting at. My third recommendation is that I think we should start thinking about the high school differently from the rest of the district as we talk about all these issues. Not necessarily taking different action, but at least considering that as a separate issue, because I think there are a lot of reasons why we're seeing such a prevalence of cases at the high school. I think we know that not only are high school kids bigger, and therefore there's all the questions about how susceptible smaller children are versus how infectious they also become, and there's a lot of inconclusive data about all of that. But there are reasons to suspect that not that little kids can't catch it or don't spread it. I think we have evidence that they do both of those things. But there are reasons to wonder if it's not quite at the same rate as adults. And high school kids, for the most part, especially the older ones, are adult sized. So I think that's a piece of it. Another piece of it is clearly that high school age kids have considerably more independence than younger kids. And as a result, they go and they do things that put them in situations that younger kids are largely prevented from being allowed to do. The high school itself is a much more complicated operation. At the other levels, we have the kids cohorted all day long. At the high school, they are out and about, moving through that building throughout the day. And so for a lot of different reasons, I think that of the things we do, the high school poses the greatest challenges. And therefore, there's a possibility, especially considering some of the other limitations of the high school, like the size of the rooms, and so forth and so on. I can go on. For all these reasons, I think the high school has to be considered separately and should be considered separately. And when we decide what to do about things moving forward, we should say, what do we want to do as a district, and then what do we want to do as the high school? Because they don't necessarily always need to be the same thing. Number 4, I don't want to take any. I don't want to make any assumptions about what the committee's will would be tonight, given our data being above 8. But regardless of how you feel as a group, I would highly recommend staying hybrid through this week. For one, the next data comes out in 2 days, so there's an opportunity there. But 2, because the data does not represent an emergency, because the state, both from the governor's office and through DESE, are telling us, you shouldn't consider this for 3 weeks. Even if there's a reason to consider for as a district or even a school to make a change, I think you want to give families an opportunity to plan for that. And that's why I don't see a reason why we wouldn't complete this week as number 5. So right now, the impact of positive cases at our K-8 schools is low, right? Even though the number of positive cases is pretty evenly distributed, right? The impact of those positive cases at the elementary and middle school levels is low. So my recommendation would be that there's no reason to hurry a judgment about those schools, given that the state is telling us to wait 3 weeks. The guidance says to wait 3 weeks. And we know that right now, we're not seeing an impact from cases at those levels. So I would say that if we wait for 3 weeks of data, which takes you through the 14th, you consider those 3 weeks of data at your next meeting, which would be the 19th. And based on what the data is, we can talk about whether there's something that needs to happen then at that time or not, because the state does say that after 3 weeks, if you're still in the red, we should consider switching. And then my last recommendation is specific to the high school. While I've said I would wait this week to do anything in particular, I do think that because we are seeing the impact, it's not just about the impact of the cases in terms of the fact that we have so many students being quarantined. There's also the consequences of having so many students out, right? So one, we have a significant number of teachers who have been quarantined. That really becomes a challenge to cover all of that. And we also have significant numbers of kids who are out of the room because they're being quarantined. So there are teachers who have several students who can't come to school now. That has an impact on our ability to deliver what we have planned. It also creates extra work on several different levels. And so at some point, the cumulative effect of so many people being in quarantine gets in the way of us being effective. So for all those reasons, and given the fact that I think that we're seeing the cases be at the high school, while that continues to be true, I would say that if the data this week comes in high, as in higher than it was, which would suggest that we're trending upward, not, back to the state's point, you don't want to ping pong. So if, the data on Wednesday drops precipitously, then you could make the case, well, that was, that we've sort of past the crest and there's no reason to act because we're going to be hopefully going down again. But if it goes up, considering that our situation is not like, I talked about Rentham earlier, it's a small community, just a couple cases can take you from green to red, and because of just, the impact of that in terms of percentages. And so, you don't want a couple cases at a nursing home to then push you into closing down the schools for 2 weeks, only to have, once those cases are no longer part of the data, you drop right back down to being green again. You don't want that kind of a situation. Well, here in Attleboro, we're much larger. It takes more cases to swing the data. The data has been steadily rising for 6 weeks. If it continues to rise, I think there's good reason to believe that it's not going to just, the bottom's not going to drop out. And by the way, I want to remind everybody that the rate that the state uses is a 2-week measure. So when there's new cases, those new cases show up in that week's data, right? But then they're the second week of the next week's data as well. So, if we rose because of, say, an increase from a situation at the fire department, right? Like if that was a contributing factor to why our number went up. Well, if those numbers were included in last week's report for the first time, then they're also going to be in this week's report. So I think there's good reason to believe that our number is not going to just fall right back down. And so I'm saying that a move to remote at the high school might deserve some consideration given the number of positive cases that we're seeing there in advance of that same decision being made for the rest of the district.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open it up to questions and comments from the committee. Ms. Sawyer, did you have a comment?
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent, for clarifying the close contact. I had a couple parents reach out to me regarding that. Also, I'm basically looking for a time frame from the time someone's notified and all the other parents are notified. How many days are on average happening?
Notified of being a close contact?
Yes.
So most students who are identified as close contacts are identified within 24 hours of the positive case being of us being notified of a positive case. So most of the students, so if we have a case Sunday night, which for some reason happens a lot, by the end of day Monday, the majority of those close contacts have been contacted. But as I said, sometimes for various reasons, we don't realize someone was a close contact for another day, sometimes even 2. And then in some cases, like we had a situation in which there was a positive case, and then something like 10 students appeared, I think it was more like 3 or 4 days later as a result of the state's contact tracing. So in that case, those students found out, several days later, but that was because that's how long the state took to do their part of the job. So within say 4 days, rarely is there much change after that. Most of it's all within 24 hours. It's not uncommon to have an adjustment or 2 in the second day. And then again, sometimes we find something out in day 3 or 4, but the great majority of the work is done within that first day.
Okay. All right. Excellent. I just had a parent reach out to me who had a complaint on how their child actually made it all the way to school on Friday and then was told to come pick up their student. This is in relation to this last Tuesday's student, but anyway, so that's fine. So it varies day to day. So it could be 24 hours, it could be a couple of days. Okay. All right. And then I saw Scott had his hand up, and I'll let him ask his question then. And then I have a question regarding Chromebooks at the end. So I'll let everyone else discuss these other things. But thank you.
Mr. Domenici?
Thank you, Chairman. I will try and be very quick with the couple of points I wanted to make. The first is I wanted to say, when we first made our decisions in August, one of the biggest reasons that I voted for us to open remote is my concern about not having enough time to get our protocols in place. Clearly, we're seeing that not only do we have enough time, but we are seeing, that as far as keeping spread out of the schools, for as much as we have to be reactive, the protocols are doing the job. We can't control what happens outside of the building, unfortunately. But for when we find out that we have cases, I think the administration has acted very quickly, and I think you should have a lot of credit for that. So I just a couple of quick questions. Are the capacities for AVA still? I mean, we had 1,200 students approximately and 35 teachers. Is that still approximately the capacity that we're working with when we say that the AVA is, at capacity?
Yes, those are still the numbers. So we're waiting to see how many students are asking to leave the AVA to return back to the hybrid learning model with the schools. And then from there, we'll be able to look at the waiting list and then have some students on the waiting list fill those spots of the students that have left.
Thank you. And I say that, because we have 35 educators, which is probably somewhere around the vicinity of 10% of our total educators running the AVA, which has 20% of our students. And I know you can't always make a nice even percentage like, well, if 20% are here, we get 20% of the educators, because it just simply doesn't work that way because of the classes. But I was curious if we had enough, if there were that many more folks in the AVA, would there be consideration taken to, if we had 100 people on the waiting list, would there be consideration to saying, well, we might need to bring them in and then get some educators in? Or are we telling folks that it's only when there's capacity at this point in time? Because we get questions, so it'd be good to just make sure we have the guidance.
Yeah, so we don't have the ability to hire more teachers, and there aren't, class sizes across the district are low as a result of all these students being in the AVA. But, a couple kids out of every room doesn't create a situation in which there are classes that could easily be dissolved and then the staff reassigned, which, by the way, if we could do that, would be extremely disruptive to the education of the kids that we're doing that to. But if we had a situation in which we had to do that, that's a thing that has happened, in the past. It's not, it's not the end of the world. It's just not good practice. But quite honestly, there aren't any such situations where we could clearly do that, because basically what I'm saying is that if you've got, 3 classes in a grade at a school that are all at, I don't know what the numbers are, but say, 22, which is a fantastic number, to dissolve one of those and put those 22 kids into those other 2 sections creates class sizes that are above 28. So the only way to really staff the AVA is to hire more people. And, as Mr. Furtado will tell you, we've well past our abilities to do so.
Understood. Do we know how many, I don't think I heard it, but how many folks do we have on the waiting list? Just out of curiosity.
I haven't checked it in a couple days. It fluctuates on a daily basis, but right now it's probably over 100.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, when we talk about the potentials, and I know that we're not near a vote just yet, but when we talk about saying if a district goes remote, or what may happen if like the high school goes remote, and then that might have an impact on athletics. Can we get that in writing? Like if that's the guidance, is there some place where we can refer to it because the questions will come potentially if we have to make that decision at some point in time. And it would just be good to have that somewhere that we can refer to.
Will do.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of statements and then a couple of questions. First, a month and a half ago when we first started talking about this, I think this district made the right choice by going hybrid, but also offering ABA and being as transparent as we were. We gave parents the most options. I've talked to other staff members from other districts, nearby states, as well as Massachusetts. A lot of them didn't have that third option, that ABA option. So they were forced to go one way or the other. I think we did the right thing. And we made sure that parents understood the risks associated. We were very transparent in my belief. Also, I think this data is actually, I think overall, our data is positive. Although I agree that looking at the city's numbers as well as the total student population numbers is important. Really, I think the in-school student numbers, student and staff numbers, that's what we should be making our decisions on. That's what we really should be focusing on, because yes, if a student who is working ABA gets COVID, it's a terrible thing and it's part of the community numbers, but that's not getting into the schools. We should be looking at that, in my opinion, what's getting into the schools, whether or not this is a problem in the schools. But generally, I believe the numbers show that our procedures, they appear to be working. So great job to the administration, great job to all the staff. I think, we must be doing a great job, because when you look at the numbers as you broke it down, with the 6 students that have actually in-school students, the cohort A, B, or C students, it's really 1 or 2 a week over the last 4 weeks. We're not seeing a huge influx of in-school students come down positive. It's week 1 was 1, week 2 was 2, week 3 was 2, and week 4 was 1. So I look at that as a pretty steady, and it's a positive thing. And I would assume, I think it's a pretty logical thing that as the communities start to open up more and more, as we start to move things indoors, restaurants, bars, what have you, these numbers, the overall numbers are going to have a tendency to move up, but we seem very steady right now. I think that's a very positive thing. One question I did have is, first of all, we're reporting total cases from the start of the school year and on. And obviously that's just a number that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But am I right in understanding that after the 2-week quarantine, those students are back in the school? So isn't it active cases more important to be looking at than total cases from the start of the school year? To me, the active cases is where we should be focusing, and that seems to be something that we're missing in our discussion.
Yeah, moving forward, in trying to make a decision about the moment, I think you have that right, that's something that we could add to the picture that we're drawing for people.
And from the data that I see, our active cases, those who would actually be out with COVID positive, would be 3 students and 1 staff member, I believe, from what I'm seeing. Looking at the dates of the data you showed.
I'm pretty sure, no, I didn't bring that.
Again, that's in-school students, not total student population.
Yeah, so again, of all the people who have been affected, 71 of them are back. So we still have quite a few people who are still out.
Right, you're including quarantine. I'm talking positive cases.
Yeah.
Right.
The positive cases.
And don't get me wrong, the quarantining obviously is affecting the picture, but the positive cases is, from my point of view, the safety concern, and that's what I'm trying to focus on.
Yeah.
So it looks to me like 3 students in the last 2 weeks, active cases, and 1 staff member out of an in-school population of what, 4,500 or so?
Yep.
And that's not including teachers. 4,500 students, and then another 500 or so staff members, maybe 600?
I'm sorry,
Staff members in school, in the buildings?
there are 700 people.
700.
800,
Okay, so
depending on-
4,500 students, 700 staff, 4 active cases. All right, thank you.
One question I had, and before, I guess I should just echo what the past couple comments in that, I think there's so many ways to look at data, but looking at the cases that have been in the schools and then the fact that there's been no transmissions at the schools, I think is to me, from a safety perspective, the most important thing to look at. And I think, we were tested immediately on the first day of school, and the fact that to date, we haven't had any spread, I think is evidence that we can currently safely teach our students in the buildings, which I think is great for our students and for the community. One question I had with regard to the high school, I understand the reality that at some point we get to a situation at the high school where there are so many students and or staff members who are not able to attend school that it becomes impractical or ineffective to educate the students because of how many people are out. I certainly get that. I guess my question is, how does the number that comes out for the community on a Wednesday have any impact on that? Because if you're saying to us that you think that if the number goes up community-wise, if we go up above 9.3, that we should consider making the high school remote, what is the real correlation between that number and how many kids are quarantined or staff members are quarantined at the high school? Because that's what I think is more important. Is if you were to say, to us, another 100 students are quarantined, we just can't do it.
Yep.
Then I would say, yes, we should go remote. But if the city goes up to 9.9, but we don't have more quarantine cases at the high school, why should we go remote there?
So the answer is that I think there's, our data reflects the city's data in many ways, right? So in the COVID report, you'll see that the 2 weeks where we had the heaviest number of cases were the last 2 weeks. And that's part of the bigger picture that during the time in which the city went, because again, the number that was reported on Wednesday represents 2 weeks worth of data. And it was during that 2 week period that we saw the uptick, right? So our positive cases seems to be mirroring the city as a whole. And that makes sense, right? That our kids are in the community. So as the community numbers increase, the schools do as well. And so, my answer to the question, what's the correlation? The correlation is that if we continue to see the number climbing, I think that we can anticipate that our numbers will continue to climb too. And by the way, I think we should be very proud that given that we've had this much exposure, we have had zero transmission in the schools. I hesitate to take too much pride in it because that's usually when things go bad. And I would just say that even if we're right that our efforts are part of the reason why we haven't had transmission, at some point, I think that an increase in the number of students with the virus will undermine that safety, right? So we know that some number of kids are asymptomatic. So not only do you have if there's an increase in the number of people testing positive, that reflects that more people are getting tested and that there's the virus is spreading. But there's also this hidden number of kids who are in the building who are asymptomatic, which has probably been there that way from the start. And again, the protocols are keeping us safe, right? If the protocols weren't safe, if there are asymptomatic, which we don't know that there are, but I think there's good reason to believe that there are, then we'd have transmission in the school as a result of that from the get-go. That hasn't happened, so that's good. But does at some point, does the number of cases in the building contribute to a situation in which you hit some sort of tipping point? There seems to be, from everything I've read, this, they don't really understand why, but in certain circumstances, if you just have enough people who have the virus, if they're all in the same place at the same time, it's like they contribute to a condition in which the virus then becomes, you have a sort of like a super spreader event. And obviously that's the thing that we're trying to avoid at all costs. So, the state set the threshold of 8 because they're trying to create a situation in which we don't get the number high enough that those safety precautions are no longer effective. And so, that's why I think there is some correlation to it.
I don't disagree with anything you said. I guess I would just say, to me, the more relevant number would be if you were to say to the committee, at the end of the week or next week, we had 5 new positive cases in the high school. There's been no spreading, but that means there was 5 more kids in the high school in this short period of time, or 10, or whatever the number was. That seems more relevant to me than the city's number.
Well,
on
that's
its own.
why in my recommendation, I said, if the number remains high, right? So
Right.
if we go from having 5 new cases last week to 0 this week, then that's not the number remaining
Right.
high. That's the number dropping. So I'm just saying, if we continue to see multiple cases and that number continues to grow, I think that's a dangerous mix.
But is your recommendation that the commit, with regards to the high school, the committee vote that if the number citywide goes up on Wednesday again, that we then would go remote on Tuesday? That's the way I understood your recommendation.
I'm suggesting that the committee consider at what point it thinks, how much is too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm suggesting that if the number continues to climb and we continue to have cases this week, that would be a situation that I think remote at the high school is probably is something that really warrants discussion.
Ms. Larson?
With all due respect to the fire department, I think they do a great job. I'm not trying to direct my comments at them, but I have to because of what's happened. If I heard you correctly, you said the counts that the fire department had were in the number that is part of our 9.3? From last week's
I
number?
don't know that for certain, but that is my perception.
Okay. And that will be again in this week's number.
Again, that is my
Because
understanding.
it's a two-week
Correct.
process. So I have a little concern about making any move, because I have a problem making any move at the schools because of something externally to the schools that was a good size isolated situation there that is beyond our control. I'm thrilled to see that we have 0 cases coming from within the schools. That tells me that, the protocols that were put in place, people are following, and, we're getting some benefit there. We have to keep very vigilant about that. I mean, if the community truly wants to stay in the hybrid model, which from every email that I've been getting in the last 2 weeks, they want to stay in the hybrid model. They actually want them to go full time. Some of the parents, but the parents and the students need to understand that it's all completely in their control. They have to keep wearing their masks. They have to keep washing their hands. They have to keep social distancing inside and out of school. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So
Because they're catching it outside of school.
what's that?
The data suggests that
Data's
our students
gonna
are
be-
catching it outside of school. That they're
Correct.
safer in school than they are out of it.
All the data I saw tonight says that the safest place for them right now is in the school.
That is correct.
Okay. You've been trying to tell me that for years. So, I really don't want to make a decision until we've seen 3 weeks over a threshold. It's my personal feeling. I think the state gave good guidance there. I understand the concern, but I think because of what happened at the fire department, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that our number in 2 days is going to be any lower than it was last week. I mean, if it takes 2 weeks to clear these things out, there's no way for the number to go down unless the rest of the community all bottomed out at the same time.
Question, just a
So
clarifying
I'm very,
question.
very concerned about making any move until we get to our 3-week threshold. And I would very much like to wait until the meeting on the 19th. I mean, if we had more things going on inside the school, I would think differently. But right now, what's happening inside the school is telling me one thing, and what I see outside the school is telling me something else. So I guess I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Let's get to the 19th and let's evaluate where we are from there.
Mr. Hill?
Yes, just a clarifying question. I don't know if Superintendent Sawyer or anyone can shed light on it. So if a firefighter or a teacher lives out of Attleboro, are those numbers counted on our numbers?
My understanding is that the data is associated with where they live.
Okay. So we shouldn't, without knowing where the firefighters live, or, that's, and I'm not trying to counter the data that you brought here, but I do think we don't want to draw too much from the firefighters example there. So, and also, there's also, if teachers from outside of Attleboro get it, that is, not going to be reflected in our numbers as well.
Well, it'll be reflected in our staff numbers, correct, that we have here?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's reflected in this.
Yeah, it's reflected in the staff numbers, right?
Right. Yes. And we have, how many staff are quarantined right now?
16.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Mr. Storrs?
Just a clarification, so, because it kind of mirrors what Mr. Withers was saying. So Superintendent, do you agree that we should be looking at the student and the student staff numbers as far as breaking them out? Cohort ABC versus not in schools, in school versus not in school? Since
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
we
Should we
have
treat ABA
1,200
students?
students who are in the ABA, and many, not many, but some of those numbers have COVID positive situation.
Yep.
But that's not affecting our in the school system, but we're not
Correct.
looking at it that way. And I'm asking you,
So, yeah,
should we be?
whether they're in ABA or they happen to have been quarantined before they got there, really what all that matters is who was in the school and created an exposure as a result of testing positive after having been here. And so there are kids that are in the ABA. I mean, the ABA kids don't ever have cause an in-school exposure, but we have students in our schools who don't cause in-school exposure. So rather than break it out that way, I think the only thing that really matters is how often do we have in-school exposure, and how well do we do when that happens?
Right. I guess I'm focusing on the COVID positive designations. And, you're saying we have X amount of students and X amount of staff, but it looks like the majority of those students are actually not in the schools. That matters. As far as our discussion here about whether we go full remote, go full in person, or stay hybrid, knowing what's happening in the schools, not outside of schools, as Mr. Larson was indicating, that matters. And I think we should be looking at the data in that way. We already talked earlier about the active versus, not just looking at the total, but looking at the active cases. To me, it's a two picture, what's happening in the schools and what's active. And, as we move forward, is that something we can be tracking and discussing?
Yeah, active, definitely. I guess my point is that we've had 7 cases at the high school. 5 of them resulted in in-school exposure. Right? So to me, when you cut it that way, this is why the high school is a bigger problem, right? Just the dynamics in families, the reason high school students, I just think, present a different set of challenges.
Right, but the data that we're looking at is saying that there's 18 students, but the truth is only 6 of those students are in the schools on a day-to-day basis.
Many of those students are now back in school. They just,
and again, I understand that, but what I'm saying is by the data that you showed us, as far as the students who are coming hybrid, cohort A, cohort B, cohort C.
Those are those students.
6 of those students. 6 of the 18, because the 18, just to verify, the 18 is total student population, including ABA, correct?
Yep.
So 6 of those 18 are actually in-school students.
No, more.
That's more.
More, yeah, significantly more. A couple of them are ABA students, not.
So hold on, because you provided the dates.
But Mr. Storrs, just if I can clarify, I think what the 6 number is 6 students who have come to school while COVID positive, correct?
That's what I'm focusing on. Is COVID
Yeah,
positive.
but there are some hybrid students who have tested positive, but they weren't exposed to anyone because they didn't come to school after developing symptoms.
So there are, that was the question I asked earlier. So that's the number I was really trying to understand. So maybe that's never been presented. How many in-school students, cohort A, B, or C.
Yeah, so I
Have
don't
been
think
COVID
that distinction matters. What matters is how many kids come and it cause an exposure, because I don't understand whether a kid's an AVA kid or whether they were quarantined and so therefore there was no exposure. I don't know how that changes our perception of things.
Well, I guess I'm just looking at it in-school students versus out-of-school students. Just like I was saying earlier, where I care more about the in-school students and in-school staff COVID positive than I do the overall community at large. Obviously, we've got to track that because we want to make sure there's no correlation between in-school and the community. So that's what I'm talking about, is that in-school students total, I think, is more important of a discussion than total students that includes the ABA. Am I not thinking of it correctly?
Well, I'm not sure that it's a matter of correct or incorrect.
Well, I guess the way I'll think it is ABA can't cause in-school exposure.
I'm not sure that's true, because ABA students can participate in extracurriculars and athletics, and
So we do have ABA students who are coming in on a day-to-day basis for sports and after-school activities.
I don't know whether we are, but
They're allowed to.
they're allowed to. So we have to track them.
Yep, okay.
I mean, if the committee would like me to exclude the ABA students from the list so that the numbers that we're reporting are only for students who are non-ABA, I mean, we can certainly do that. Obviously, by this conversation, I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I see value in it. I don't think it should be totally excluded, but I think in-school students does matter in our discussion.
I'm just not sure what it would change if you knew that number. Because the only number that really matters is the number of kids who cause a problem, which is the exposure.
Yeah, it's
right?
the school day exposure. That's what.
The majority of the cases took place, are for kids that are in the Attleboro Public School versus the AVA, the majority of the cases. But I think in every one of the cases, none of them happened as a result of being in the school. All the cases were considered external, right, Mr. Sawyer? And it's just a matter of whether or not we had to take extra precautions. So we haven't had any case in the school of a positive case that occurred as a result of being in the school. But the numbers themselves, I mean, like Mr. Larson has said, like I think a lot of us have said, every kid, kids are only in school for a certain amount of time and then they go out. And that's where a lot of these exposures are taking place. And so, yeah, there might be some AVA students who may take part in after school activities, and maybe there's some exposure there. I don't know if the numbers we're not at that granularity, but all the numbers so far are indicating that the positive cases have come as a result of something outside of the schools. And it's a matter of understanding whether or not the close contacts were made in the school or out of the school. Even some of the close contacts, like the fall baseball team, from my understanding, a lot of those, I mean, that all happened outside of school, but a lot of those kids come to school, so they had to quarantine out of an abundance of caution. So I get what you're saying. I don't know how much more you can splice out the numbers, but I do think it's important to look at the data to see where it's happening.
The place where I got confused was on slide 19. It lists 6 individual students, 5 at the high school since the start of the school year, and 1 in the ELC. And it's cases within the schools. Are we saying that there's more cases within the schools that are not listed here, not including staff?
So I guess what do we mean by within?
I guess I take that to mean they're part of cohort A, B, or C. That's how I was reading that.
No, it's just that there was exposure within the school.
Oh, so we're saying, so are there more than these 6?
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the problem is the distance between this slide and if you go back to the 19 positive cases in the APS community, 6 incidents of in-school exposure, right? So these are the 6 cases within the schools, in-school exposure. So there are other cases in the district of students who come to school every day, or come to school every other day, or come to school twice a week, I guess is the right way to say it, who tested positive, but there wasn't exposure.
Now I understand the difference. Okay.
And my thinking, when we originally decided to put this together, there was a question of should we include the AVA kids or not? And so on the basis of 2 facts, 1, they are our students, and 2, if I'm a parent and my student is friends with someone who's in the AVA, I don't think I'm particularly concerned about that distinction if, in fact, that kid is in the Attleboro community and is tested positive. So that was the basis that I made that arbitrary decision. And I can certainly rethink it if that's the will of the committee, but I don't know how excluding the ABA kids would change our perception of things, because ultimately it's those 6 cases that are the ones that matter the most. And that's the one that those are the ones we talk about the most. And that's the ones that create all the close contacts, which are so disruptive.
Right. Any other questions, Mr. Geddes?
A couple of comments and a couple of questions. I'll echo everyone's comment that the staff has been fantastic at preventing the spread. So thank you to everyone in the schools, and thank you to the students for doing their part as well. When we had our vote in August, I did say that the first time we get a case, I wanted to shut the whole thing down, didn't want to roll the dice on it. I do think that there is a lot more context that needs to go into this decision. So I'm grateful to the administration for giving us all of this information. Where I do differ, I think, from some of the other committee members is in terms of, I agree with the recommendation that if we are going to take action in the next, either tonight or at the next meeting, right now, I do think we should limit that to the high school. But I don't know, Mr. Larson mentioned waiting till the 19th. That I don't know if we should, because we're talking about 3 weeks of data. When I look at the last 3 weeks of data, we've been right around that remote threshold. No, we haven't been over it. We haven't been over it for 3 weeks. But even since the end of August, our community number has tripled. And that's worrisome to me. Again, it's great that it's not spreading within the schools, and that we have so few students that are that have been impacted, but that I don't want to keep rolling the dice with it, I guess. But I will echo Mr. Larson's point that if you're sick, if your student is sick, if you have a pending test, please, please, please stay home so that we don't accidentally spread this. So that's my comment right now. The questions I do have, I know with each positive case or within days of positive cases at the high school, Mr. Rooney has been sending communication to families, correct, via email. The expectation will be that if there are any cases in other schools, that communication will come from the building administration, not central. Okay. And you mentioned one of your recommendations, I don't remember the exact wording, but that if we're above 9.3 per 100,000, again, to take a vote, or to make a vote that would take effect for Tuesday, the 13th. So is there a number that a community number, and I know that in conversations we've had, it's not one specific number, but is there a number that you think we should, if you suddenly saw us get to, that you would think we need to go fully remote, or you would invoke the powers of being superintendent to make that emergency decision? Or
Again, for me to invoke my emergency powers, I'd have to be facing an outbreak within a school that I can't reasonably
Possibly
explain
control.
what's going on.
Okay.
That to me is an emergency. That there is a transmission will be a serious disappointment. But if in looking at it, we understand what happened, we're going to treat that a little bit differently than if, we don't understand what's happening.
Right. And my last question, I know I emailed the two of you on Friday. I think it might be helpful for the community to know what fully remote would look like. I know it would vary at each level, but I think especially for to Mr. Larson's point, over the last few weeks, we've gotten plenty of emails from families that want us to stay open because everyone's having a different experience. Some families are struggling with hybrid greatly, and so they want us to stay open so that their student is still getting at least a couple of days in school. And there are some that are saying, everything's going great. Let's just please keep it open and keep it going. So if we were to go fully remote, what would that look like for the students while they're home?
So as we said in August, it would look completely different than it did in the spring. That was something that we definitely wanted to make sure we prepared for and planned for. And so we're still working out a lot of the details specific to each level, but what it would, one of our main goals is to make sure that the transition from the hybrid model to the remote model was seamless and that they tried to mirror each other in some way. We don't want to disrupt the entire schedule for our students, especially when we've had a lot of service providers, namely our special education staff, students receiving special education services, our Title I, there are students receiving Title I services and our students receiving English language learner services. We want to make sure that all of the schedules that we've created to support our most vulnerable students remain intact. And we also wanted to make sure that there was a combination of both whole group community meetings throughout the day and small group kind of interactive sessions throughout the day so that students would be able to toggle back and forth between those. And of course, along with some of the asynchronous time that Superintendent Sawyer spoke about prior to, when we think about a traditional school model, there are times throughout the day where students are working independently on their own, and there are times where the teacher is providing direct instruction. And so we need to continue that model when we're in the full remote model as well.
So now that we're a few weeks into this and we have a better idea of what the different days are, it's not so much that it's going to look like a Wednesday where it's everyone's at home. And it may not necessarily look like your home cohort day. So for cohort B, it's not necessarily a Monday, Thursday type of day. It's some combination of those two current remote days that we have now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It'll be a little bit of both.
Excellent. Thank you.
One point I just wanted to raise in following up, and I think Mr. Larson and Mr. Geddes coming at it from different angles about voting on this again and looking at it again. Our next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight. However, we've had special meetings before. We've discussed the possibility of having to have special meetings. And so, in the event we don't elect to go remote at any level or at a specific level, in the event the numbers in the city reach numbers that we think the administration thinks are troubling, if we have a influx of cases at the schools that are troubling, or, I'd also say at the high school specifically, or any building, if the amount of kids and or students that are quarantined starts to present logistical problems to educating students, I would say in any of those situations, we would have a special meeting and address it before whenever our regularly scheduled meeting next coming up would be. But, I did just want to stress that again, and also, add to that additional layer now of, the logistical concerns as we have more kids quarantined. If we don't vote to go remote at the high school in a week from now, the numbers just don't make it realistic, then I think we would meet before the 19th or 20th or whenever it is that we meet again. Ms. Larson?
I think that's a great idea, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm really struggling trying to balance student safety and what's good for the families, what's good for the students, and having all this data just, for an hour now, and having to make a decision of this magnitude, knowing some of the external forces that may have been involving our number. I don't think it is a prudent time to make a decision on anything tonight. I think we have time. I think the data backs up the fact that we have time from an in-school spread situation. And I guess I hope we don't get to that point tonight.
Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, part of the discussion earlier was it almost seems like the students are safer as far as being exposed in the schools than they are out of the schools, as you know, as funny as that seems. So the idea of closing even one of the schools seems as if that could lead, I'm not saying would, but could lead to the possibility of those students who are now remote full having more opportunity to be exposed. I know that's a weird way to look at it, but that's kind of what the data is showing is on a day-to-day basis, the ones that are in the school seem to be doing better overall than the community at large or the ones who are not in the school.
Yeah, and I think if people saw what school looks like K through 8, they would understand why we feel that way. And at K through 8, I completely agree with what you're saying, which is why my hope is that the numbers will go down and we can keep going along in the hybrid mode. These numbers continue to climb and we end up with 3 weeks of bad data. At that point, the guidance is going to say we're supposed to go remote. And as I said, I think we have the responsibility to follow the guidance. So I'm hoping that does not come to pass. But I worry, I sincerely worry about the high school because, high school age kids are not as compliant as younger kids are. They have greater independence and they are operating in a completely different environment than the other schools are in terms of how much movement there is and how able we are to keep them at distance. So for all those reasons, I just worry that if there's one place where if there is such a thing as some sort of tipping point in which too many people have the virus at once in the building and that therefore leads to some sort of event, I mean, the place that's most likely to happen is absolutely Attleboro High School, which is the source of my concern and the reasons why I think we should be more willing to be cautious there than perhaps elsewhere. But I certainly understand what you're all saying. I am, tortured by this decision as well. And the idea of just agreeing to wait and, have a meeting if the numbers are such that we're worried about it is a perfectly acceptable way of getting it to the same place that I'm suggesting.
Ms. Johnson, did you have a question?
I did, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. One thing that has become very clear as we go over these data points tonight is that this is something that it's not going to be a binary decision that we make on one specific data point. It's been made very clear to me how there's many different factors, and in many ways these factors are interdependent and interrelated. I would be very hesitant to make a vote tonight pending the feedback of one data point that we are expecting in the near future. I would strongly stand behind having a special meeting next week if the data points us in that direction. And that concludes my comment.
Mr. Geddes?
A comment and a question. I agree, Mr. Storrs. The data right now shows that no one is getting sick within the schools, but the students that are not in the schools are getting sick at a higher rate. But I would say that's the data to this point. That's not necessarily predictive of what could happen down the road. And I'd rather be more cautious. I would rather play it on the more cautious side. My question would be what type of timeline would you see being effective for planning purposes if we did make any action to go remote, either fully or at a particular building? So your recommendation was that we could take a vote tonight on a decision that pending the number Wednesday would go into effect for next Tuesday. So that tells me that you're looking at an 8-day time frame, or, because we obviously want families to be able to plan.
I think it's more about having 2 days in school before there's an impact. Again, unless, not that high school kids don't pose their own problems for parents, they do. But it's not quite the same as when we have to do something with, elementary schools. So for the high school, I wouldn't want to, treat that like an emergency and close school for the next day and leave people scrambling. But I would say at a minimum, 2 days of notice, two school days.
A matched cohort.
Yeah.
Yeah, so whether.
That gives the teachers a chance to meet with their kids before they
So-
go remote.
So if numbers come out Wednesday and we had a meeting Thursday, you think the most appropriate time to go remote would still be that October 13th date? But if it were to be next Monday, then we'd be going remote effective next Friday, which would be the.
So from where I look at it, you're looking at either, Monday or Thursday as a day to start. Or look at it this way, you would either, start on a Monday or start on a Wednesday. Just to not break up a matched cohort.
Right. No, I'm saying, so if numbers come out this Wednesday, we have a special meeting on Thursday evening, any vote you would recommend would take effect.
So so those kids that Thursday is cohort A day.
Right.
Those kids are not going to see their teacher again until Thursday.
The following Monday.
But that's because there's a
Because of the
holiday.
holiday.
That's the reason why it's Tuesday.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
Yeah.
I forgot about the holiday.
Yeah.
Okay.
So because of the holiday,
Yeah. Okay. So if we were to meet on Monday, it would be to take effect remote after Thursday of next week,
yeah.
so that
that's-
both cohorts could, okay. I think I got you. Thank you.
All right. So logistically, I don't think we actually have to take a vote if we're not going to change anything. However, I know that this was a much publicized meeting, and I know a lot of people are watching, and I also know that there are different opinions. So while I don't think it's necessary to take a vote if we're not changing anything, I think that being said, I do want to do votes on this at this time. And while I do give credence to the administration's argument for at least considering the high school separately from the other two levels, whether we do anything different or not is a different story, but at least considering them separately. So for the purpose of ease and also the purpose of having the motions be as unbiased, I guess, as possible, what I'm going to do is simply base them on the recommendations we received. And so I would entertain a motion to remain in the hybrid model at the elementary and middle school levels going forward until our October 19th meeting or until a special meeting is called and necessary.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And then the next motion, again, and just reading this based on the recommendation that was given, is that the motion would be if with the motion, I would entertain a motion to vote to go remote at the high school starting Tuesday, October 13th, if the citywide numbers produced by the Commonwealth increase when released this Wednesday.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Not exactly, but I'll do my best. I'll entertain a motion. I'll entertain a motion to instruct the administration to go remote at Attleboro High School starting Tuesday, October 13th, if Attleboro's average daily cases is above last week's number of 9.3 per 100,000. Do you have a motion so we can have discussion?
So moved.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Mr. Geddes,
No.
Mr. Withers, no. Mr. Larson.
No.
Are we not doing discussion?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see any. All right, backing up. Motion has been made and seconded. Do we have discussion? Mr. Storrs.
I have to say, I agree with what Mr. Larson and what even the superintendent has said, that I don't believe we should be making the decision on the city's numbers. We need to be looking at the school's numbers in relation to that. And I also agree with Mr. Larson that although Mr. Hill was right, we don't know specific numbers of that group that came down positive. We don't know how many are Attleboro residents. We have to assume at least some are. I would like to see us wait the time for that to be filtered out, I guess is a way to say it, so that the numbers would be not affected by that. But that's all I have to say.
Anyone else? Mr. Geddes?
I was actually voting no because I would, I'm on the opposite end of Mr. Storrs. I would rather not wait to see what Wednesday's numbers are. I think the administration has raised a number of legitimate concerns related to high school. So my preference would actually be for us to go ahead and vote to go remote effective based on the timeline that the superintendent was explaining at the end of this week, so that both cohorts could still get at least one day of school in front of the educators, or the students. The educators could be in front of the students for a couple of days, and then reassess at our October 19th meeting, possibly bringing them back into a hybrid model at that point.
So you want to go remote regardless of the numbers on Wednesday at the high school starting next week?
Correct.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Yeah,
Mr.
Steve.
Mr. Ritchie, yeah.
This is Scott. Just a couple of points. I mean, the thresholds are the thresholds, and I don't think that we have the right to not, to only count them when it suits us and then start splicing the numbers out when we start to rise. But that being said, I think we shouldn't be making a decision based on 1 week in the red. So I think we should at least see what the other numbers are like. It's hard to have an if then because to that end we should look at what those numbers truly mean. I mean, if we hold steady at 9.3, are we not moving forward with potentially closing, or going remote at the high school, if it warrants it? I think there's a few variables to consider, including the district's numbers, because again, if the cases, if the city's threshold even lowers a little bit, but is still red, but at the same time, we're still continuing to see a number of high school students testing positive inside or outside the school, and it's causing more quarantines and of staff and students, then we may have no choice, even if the numbers improve. So I think we need to at least see another week's state's data, and I'd like to see another week of the district's data if at all possible. And those are my comments.
Ms. Porto?
They've made recommendations to have the high school be remote from the beginning. So why, I mean, it makes no sense to want to see more data when the numbers are continually going up. And the high school, they said it's hard to continue to keep these kids safe. I mean, the temperatures are going down. They have windows open to keep ventilations clear, That's just my thought.
Any other comments or questions? All right, so Mr. Geddes,
Can you explain what a yes and a no mean?
yeah,
please?
so a yes vote on the current motion would instruct the administration to go remote as of next Tuesday if Attleboro's average daily cases rises above 9.3 per 100,000 when they're released on Wednesday. A no vote means that we're not instructing the administration to go remote. And essentially, we would be doing the same thing we voted to do at the elementary and middle schools, which is to either wait and see the data and reconsider on October 19th, or if necessary, have a special meeting in the interim.
So I would just say that, obviously, it's your motion, but in the original language, there was a conditional that really isn't captured in that motion, which is that there's a precondition that the cases remain high this week, right? To the point that's been made in several places, to just base it off of the Wednesday report is I think is a mistake, right? Because it's just one number that has flaws of itself, and so you got to round that out. And my concern is that if we're continuing to see the same kind of number of cases we've been seeing, and you have that number going up, that to me that's a bad combination. But if that number stays the same or goes up slightly, but you see a precipitous drop in the number of cases, then that would be a reason to rethink the whole thing, because perhaps something else is going on. So,
Well, what does remain high mean, I guess? I mean, that's just.
I mean, we had the number of cases we had last week, right, was what, 6?
What is overall this motion be better if it was simply that we're voting to remain hybrid at this time? And then as we move forward and we get to Wednesday, if the numbers in your discussion with the administration are concerning, then a special meeting could be called to discuss further.
Yeah,
I think you're right. So if you want to make a motion to amend.
I just wanted.
If a special meeting is the way to handle this, then I think a motion saying that if the number goes up, then that forces us to have a special meeting to have a conversation about what it means with whatever data we have at that point. Something like that.
I don't know if we would need to take a motion that we would have an automatic special meeting. That's
No,
really.
I think that would be determined based on what the data says. I think the motion would simply be that for the time being, we stay in hybrid.
So I'll attempt to make a motion to amend the original motion for the high school to stay hybrid at this time.
So I think the first thing is to make a motion to amend.
Yeah, well, so with that, that's the amendment.
Yep. Okay.
So moved.
Any discussion or questions? All right. So this is a motion to amend the motion on the table so that the motion will now read a motion to continue in hybrid at the high school. A yes vote is a yes to amend the motion. It's not a yes on the merits. It's been seconded. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
All right, we now have a motion to instruct the administration to remain in hybrid at Attleboro High School for the time being. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions? So a yes vote on this motion would essentially be to do the same things we did at the elementary school and the middle school, remain in hybrid for the time being. If necessary, we'll have a special meeting. If not, we will look at it again at our next meeting. Mr. Geddes?
No.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
No.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for following along in that. Appreciate it. Anything else, Mr. Sawyer, on your report?
That concludes my report.
Okay. Mr. Furtado?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two things for the committee's consideration this evening. One is an amendment to the Sodexo facilities contract that reflects the additional custodial services we have requested from them to deal with the pandemic in our buildings. I think it's all pretty self-explanatory, but that reflects the cost through December 31st of 10 additional custodians plus 2 quality assurance personnel who inspect the cleaning in our buildings daily across the district.
Any other comments?
Not on that one.
Okay. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to amend the Sodexo management agreement as described by Mr. Furtado.
So moved. Second.
Any further questions or discussion? Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Thank you. The second item, motion, Mr. Chairman, for the consideration is our electric rates for our commodity expire as of December 15th. And, commodity pricing kind of goes up and down pretty regularly. We had an opportunity to lock in what I thought was a very reasonable cost for electricity for 3 years after December 15th. It reflects an 11% reduction in our current rates. And that's about $1 million budget. So that's about $100,000 in savings annually once the rates are in effect. So unfortunately, to lock it in, we have to take kind of quick action. And that's why it came before the committee this evening before going through finance.
Do you have a motion to approve the proposed 3-year agreement for electricity supply by Direct Energy?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All right, seeing none. Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Furtado. Next, we have our minutes from our September 14th, 2020 meeting. The minutes were circulated with your packet. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion or edits? All right, Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next, we have the consent agenda. As we've done the last several meetings, I'll entertain them all as one item. We have 3 items tonight. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $15.25 from Bay State Textiles to Hill Roberts Gift Donation Line. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $2,220 from the Feinstein Foundation as broken down in the chairman's memorandum dated 9/29/20. And a motion to accept a donation in the amount of $24.80 from the Profate family to go to lunch balances to help a family in need.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Next, we have our subcommittee meetings reports. And to start, I will turn it over to Mr. Larson for finance and budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finance and Budget Subcommittee met Wednesday, September 16th. We reviewed where we were early in the year. There are some things that we need to bring the full committee up to speed with. And we have one motion to bring forward from a housekeeping point of view. We'll do the housekeeping issue first, just because it keeps things simple. Have a motion to bring forward to the full committee recommendation to pay past year invoices totaling $21,905.49. There was a breakdown of the invoices that was sent out with a package. So can I have that motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions?
Want me to do the roll call?
I don't know. I didn't know if they had a question right there or not.
I don't see any.
Okay, I don't see any questions.
All right.
All right, I see no questions. Yes, please.
Mr. Gaddis?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porta?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, just a few things just to bring the committee up to speed with. First, we have had the change in the the mini buses. We finished one lease up the end of last June. We've started the new one. The old buses are now gone. The new ones are on property, so we can start using those in the future. I shouldn't say one. We have two major issues financially, just because of the way we're doing school and the changes that we've had to adapt to. The first is we're currently projecting that we're going to be somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million over budget for electrical and heat. As any of you who have been in one of the buildings know, we are blowing a lot of air to keep the air circulated in the buildings and maintain the proper ventilation levels that we have to for COVID. In order to do that, we're running a lot of the blowers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We normally would not be doing that, and that is going to greatly affect our electric bill. Also, in the personnel line items, we're looking and projecting right now about $750,000 of an overage. And that is because of the additional staff and personnel that we've had to bring on, both in the buildings and within the district, to provide all the different versions of school that we're currently doing. On the plus side, City Hall is aware of these issues. They are holding some COVID funds in reserves to help us with this, but it obviously is something that we need to continue to be mindful of and do the best that we can, both to stay in compliance with what we need to do, but also watch our expenses to minimize any impact that they're going to have. Unless there's any other questions, that's the extent of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Infrastructure and facilities, Mr. Domenici?
Thank you, Chairman. We also met on September 16th, after budget, actually. Just some quick updates. At that time with the new high school, moving along really well. The project is about a month ahead of schedule, which is good, considering that there are some reports about weather being a little rough this coming winter. So just try and stay ahead as much as possible is great. The fields at Brennan are, at the time of our meeting, they were 90% completed, on target to be completed by the end of October. And as a matter of fact, the Municipal Building Commission, School Building Committee, Municipal Council, and our body here have been invited to get a tour of the building in the new fields on November 4th. So that's some good news there. Continuing that theme, the Brennan and Wamsutta roofs were completed. At the time of our meeting, they were just ironing out a few punch lists. Not only that, but in addition to the work that was done, it coming in on time and under budget by 20 to 25%, it also included adding a system to deal with ice dams on the roofs. So we added a little bit to scope and still came in on time and well under budget, which was great news. Next couple of items, the fire at the high school. our partners that are working on the high school project at Consigli did the work to perform restoring the 12 classrooms that were damaged by the fires in the high school. These classrooms are on 3 floors. The work has been done. The closet work was in progress at the time of our meeting. But I believe by now, and Mr. Furtado can probably back me up on this, I think all that work is done at this point. And then there was, at the time of our meeting, there was discussion about the gym floors at Hill Robertson, Hyman Fine. At that time, the motions did not come out of the subcommittee at the municipal council out of concern about the impact of COVID having on city revenue. Since that time, it actually did come out of committee and was voted down by the council at this time. But the council, though largely voted, not in favor, they are in favor of the project, just to vote on it at a later point in time. So they just, again, like a lot of folks, just had the concerns that although the floors are needed, we don't quite know what the next fiscal year is going to look like. So, holding off on a vote, might be beneficial. At the same time, we operationally, running in the hybrid model adds a little stress to our budget. So it's just a matter of prioritizations and making sure that, the city is prepared. I know there was a lot of certified free cash, but again, we don't know what revenues are going to look like for next year. And I believe at this point, those were the major highlights. I did not have any new motions to bring out. I just wanted to end my update with mentioning that at Thatcher, Jacob Connors, who did present in front of us, he completed his Eagle Scout project work, coordinated with Mr. Parento and his whole team, did an outstanding job. And I just wanted to thank him. It was a very aggressive project that he put together. They went above and beyond. And if you have the opportunity to go by and take a look at the area, it's very well done. So I just wanted to give him a thanks for all his hard work. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Domenici. Finally, we have policy and personnel. Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Policy and Personnel Subcommittee met on September 21st. The following policy-related motions were voted out unanimously. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each one. Generally, most of these are part of our 3-year review, which is part of our policies, that we review all of our policies on a 3-year cycle minimum. For the most part, these are all minor edits, but I'm going to go through each policy, talk about the edits or the action that's related to the motion. And if there's any specific policy that somebody wants me at the end to do separately, please let me know when I ask at the end of each policy. Otherwise, I will review all of them and take them all up in one motion. So first, we reviewed policy ADC, tobacco products on school premises prohibited. There's very minor formatting, removing in parentheses and adding the Mass General laws at the end so that we're aligned with MASC as presented. Is there any questions on that policy? Okay. Next is policy ADC R1, which is regulation 23. MASC does not have this regulation. This is actually a city of Attleboro regulation regarding the elimination of environmental tobacco smoke from indoor air. The discussion was that we really didn't feel that this is a policy. Effectively, our ADC tobacco products on school premises prohibited policy covers the intent of this. So the committee believes that we should remove this from the policy binder. Is there any questions? Seeing, hearing none, I'll move on. Next was policy EEAEC, which is also dual designated as JICC, which is student conduct on school buses. We are adding the term guardians, so now it's parents/guardians throughout the policy. And we moved the JICC to a parenthesis next to the EEAEC. Other than that, the policy aligned with MASC. And we're going to note the review date. Is there any discussion on EEAEC? Seeing none, I'll move on. Policy EEAEC R1, which is also dual designated as JICC-R1, rules for students riding school buses. We did reformat this policy so that instead of just being a list as it currently is, it now actually talks about, I guess you could say, the different phases of usage of our school buses, from waiting to get on the bus to getting on the bus to riding on the bus, et cetera. And we also added some guidance which came from DESI. So is there any questions regarding EEAEC-R1? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on. Next is policy GA, personnel policies goals. We pretty much are just removing the legal reference and we are aligned with MASC. Is there any further discussion? Okay. Next, policy GBA, equal employment opportunity. We did add the legal pregnancy or pregnancy-related condition status, along with the other race, color, religion, et cetera statuses, and removed the note at the bottom of the policy so that we are aligned with MASC. Is there any further questions or discussion? Great. Next, policy GBEA, staff ethics / conflict of interest. Our policy aligns with MASC, so we are noting the review date. Any questions? Great. Next, policy GBEB, staff conduct, mostly minor edits, added and regulations, so now it's laws and regulations, so we're aligned with MASC. Changed the term school system to school district to align with MASC. We did maintain one point that is not in the MASC policy, and that is the accurate reporting and responsible use of leave times as defined by contracts. That was already in our existing policy, and we're maintaining that. So is there any questions regarding GBEB? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on. Next, GBEBC, gifts to and solicitation by staff. The administration recommends aligning with MASCs. Pretty much to do that, we need to add the /guardians again, and that's primarily, other than that, I think we were pretty close. So is there any questions regarding GBEBC? Seeing none, I'll move on. Policy GBEC, drug-free workplace policy. Our policy aligns with MASC, so we are just looking to note the review date. Any questions? I'll move on. Next, policy GBED, tobacco use on school property by staff members prohibited. The motion is to approve the edits of the policy to align with MASCs, and that's just adding in the cross references. Any further discussion, questions? I'll move on. Policy GBI, minor edits to this policy. This is staff participation in political activities. Again, changing school system to school district, and there was one portion of a sentence that was not in the MASC policy. So we're aligning with that. Is there any questions? All right, seeing none, I'll move on. Policy GBK, staff complaints and grievances. Our policy matches MASC, so motion is to note the review date. Any questions? Okay, I'll move on to policy GCBB, which is employment of principals. Again, minor edit of removing parentheses. Other than that, the policy aligned with MASC. Is there any discussion? Okay, I'll discuss the athletic trainer position separately. So as far as all the policy related motions, I didn't hear anybody ask me to separate them, so I'll take them all up at once. So we have a motion to approve all of policies as presented and discussed.
So moved. Second.
Okay, is there any questions or discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Stories, yes. Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
And Ms. Johnson?
Ms. Johnson, we lost.
Okay, thank you. So the policy related motions have all been approved. Next, we did discuss a new job description of athletic trainer. The Job description was provided to the members in the packet. Is there any, again, this job description was voted out of the full committee unanimously, so it's going right up for discussion and vote. Is there any questions regarding this job description? Seeing none. Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Ms. Porter,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs, yes. Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers,
Yes.
and Mr. Gettis.
Yes.
And lastly, we did discuss 3 curriculum-related policies. There's no action on them, just to go over what we did discuss. We looked at a policy IKC, which is grade point average, also IKCA, valedictorian, salutatorian eligibility, and IKF graduation requirements. Mass, they only have one of these, which is the graduation requirements. Attleboro Public Schools does not have any of these, but with the changes in the past year and a half or so with some of these things, we did want to have a discussion about them. In the end, there were reasons not to, at this time, look to add these to our policy binder, including the one that Mass does have. So we had those discussions, but we did, as the administration and the committee did have a good discussion about the graduation requirements and how our requirements are actually higher than the state's in 2 areas when it comes to history, social science, as well as lab-based science. We require 4 years as compared to the 3 years, but there was no need to actually put this into policy since it's understood and it's in the handbooks. And then we also discussed the grade point average and the decile ranking, the honor roll transcripts and things of that nature. And then we also did have a discussion about the Val-Sal and how that has changed in the last year and a half, and the positives and questions regarding that change. So again, nothing to bring forward, no motions to discuss, but are there any questions regarding those policies? All right, seeing none, that concludes, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Storrs. Anyone else have anything for the school committee tonight? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Ms. Porto?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.